Welcome to the Community Planning Aberdeen Board on Wednesday, the 30th of November 2020. If I can begin this afternoon by thanking Chief Superintendent Kate Stephen for her time on the board. I think she did an outstanding piece of work for us representing Police Scotland on the board. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome Chief Superintendent Graham Mackey to join us. And with that, I would like to seek your approval that we appoint Graham in Kate's place as the Vice Chair of the board. Can we agree that, please? Thank you very much indeed. I will now hand over to Mrs. Swanson, who can perhaps go through the housekeeping for the meeting. Gogo, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Please note that the public section of the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. Can all attendees switch off their camera and mute their microphone when not speaking? The camera and microphone should only be switched on when you are invited to speak. If you wish to speak, please use your raise hand icon on the toolbar, and I will now ask members participating today to confirm their attendance once their name has been announced, so that this is clear in the recording of the meeting and also can be recorded for the minute. Thank you. Chair?
Present.
Graham Mackey.
Present.
Caroline Hiscox. Chair Ewing.
Present.
Duncan Cockburn. Yvonne Boyd. Gail Beattie. Jonathan Smith.
Present.
Luan Grosjean.
Aye, present.
Councillor Gregg. Matthew Lockley.
Present.
Councillor Radley.
Present.
Neil Cowie. Paul O'Connor.
Present.
Pete Edwards.
Present.
Richard McCullen.
Present.
Councillor MacDonald.
Present.
Simon Rayner. Susan Webb.
Present.
And Chair, we've got two apologies from Alistair Robertson and Angela Scott. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And that then takes us to the declarations of interest. Has anyone got a declaration of interest or transparency statement? I'm seeing one hand up online. I can't see who. Susan, is it yourself? Thanks.
Hi.
Over.
It is. Good afternoon, Chair. It was just to record Caroline Hiscox's apologies for today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Have we any declaration? I'll take it there's no declarations of interest. And I see we've now been joined by Councillor Gregg, so he's now in attendance. Okay, moving on, the minutes and the forward planner. 1.1, the board minute of 23rd September 2022 for approval. Can we agree the minute, or does anybody have any matters or points arising? Councillor MacDonald.
It was just to ask, convener, the on page 5, will the update come from Mr. McCallum on the National Care Service event in his part of the agenda?
Chair, the response from Mr. McCallum was provided in an email that went out to the board members on the 18th of November. It was part of a wider pack with the full responses that were outstanding from the last meeting.
Thank you. Apologies, I must have missed that one. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any other matters arising from the minute? I'm not seeing any hands and I'm not seeing anything on the board. Can we agree the minute? Thank you very much indeed. That then takes us to the draft CPA Management Group Minute of the 26th of October 2022 for information. Has anyone got any queries from that? Not seeing any hands, and I'm not seeing anything on the board. That takes us then to 1.3, the CPA Board Forward Planner. Have we any questions? Not seeing anything. And then that takes us to 1.4, the national update. And I see we have on the screen. I'll hand over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. And just to pick up on the National Care Service point, if there are any follow-up questions on the back of the written answer that was provided, then I am always very happy to follow up on those points. I'll be very brief. Just a couple of things that I wanted to highlight this afternoon. From a national perspective, as you would expect, there is a large focus at the moment going towards the Scottish Government's budget, which is due to be published in December for 23-24. That will reflect the UK Government's autumn statement in November and be kind of considering of the impact of the decisions made there. And how they will apply and be taken forward by the Scottish Government. So clearly a key consideration for the government and obviously for the board more generally. And this follows the Scottish Government publishing the emergency budget review on the 2nd of November. And this update, I think, probably really reflected the importance that was being placed around the cost of living crisis and taking what steps possible to address the cost of living crisis, in particular work being done on the Fuel Insecurity Fund and the doubling of the Scottish Child Bridging Payment. So a real focus on that cost of living impact for the people of Scotland. In addition to that, the Deputy First Minister, I think, was quite clear that a number of savings would need to be made across government, partly to respond to the need to make sure that pay deals were fully funded. And that amounted to about 615 million of savings, which included 400 million within health and social care to support those deals. So clearly, that has been a key focus, has been reacting and reflecting the need to address the investment required for pay by making sure that that is managed and balanced within the overall government's position. In addition to that, as I say, there has been a real focus on cost of living. A lot of work is being done in government in relation to food insecurity. And by the end of the winter, the Scottish Government is due to publish a final version of our plan to end the need for food banks as a primary response to hardship. And in relation to energy bills and fuel poverty, as I've already mentioned, the Fuel Insecurity Fund has been put in place this year through the EBR, and clearly a key focus of government is doing what can be done to support energy bills and fuel poverty. Just finally, there's work ongoing in relation to the regional economic development work, and we're working within Scottish Government closely with UK Government colleagues on that. I know colleagues in Aberdeen will be very familiar with that, with the City deal in Aberdeen, and we'll continue to engage with partners on that in the coming weeks and months ahead. But that was all from me, Chair. Thanks for the opportunity to update.
Thank you very much for that. Have we any questions? I'm looking around the room. I'm not seeing any hands, and I'm not seeing any hands on the board. So we're getting off very lightly there. I thought there would have been quite a few questions given the amount of things that have been happening on the national front, but that's good. Okay. In that case, we'll move on to 2.1, the draft community empowerment strategy. We have Michelle Coughlin, Margaret Stewart and David Black who are going to do a presentation. I'll hand over first of all to you, Michelle. Thanks.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I am Michelle Crombie now, the Community Planning Manager for Aberdeen City Council, and I'm also the chair of the Community Empowerment Group. So this afternoon I'm joined by Dave Black, who works for Grampian Regional Equality Network, and also Margaret Stewart, who is our service manager responsible for our CLD services. We are part of the Community Empowerment Group, which has led the development of the Community Empowerment Strategy, which you're being asked to approve this afternoon. So by way of introduction, we're going to start with a short presentation, taking you through the three key sections of the strategy. So Gogo, can I ask you just to pop up the presentation? Thanks, Gogo. And if you're able to pop it onto slideshow. That's you. Great. And if you pop on the next slide, that would be brilliant. Okay, great. Thanks very much for that. So we will start with just setting out the purpose and the guiding principles set out within the strategy. We'll then go on to talk about where we're now and where we want to be. And finally, we will talk about the community tools and resources section. So I'm now going to hand over to Dave.
Thanks, Michelle. So yeah, the idea behind the strategy and the thinking of the group that developed the strategy was based on understanding that communities know best what is needed and how things best work, and that society is stronger and more resilient when communities are actively working together to address problems and create positive places and environments. Could you move to the next slide, please? Thanks. So the broad purpose of the strategy is to provide a framework to guide how we work together in innovative ways for the benefit of our communities through engagement, participation, and most importantly, empowerment. We recognised as a group that in terms of delivering on the visions for the city, so for example, the one of the local outcome improvement plan, to achieve such visions and be a successful, thriving city, we need an active and inclusive citizenship in Aberdeen where people have a voice and an ability to influence what happens to them and their communities. The document speaks to an ambition of Aberdeen as a democratic city with empowered citizens having influence over their lives and outcomes. And we recognise as a group that we need a strategy like this because where we are at the moment, we're not in a place where we're effective enough in these ways. Most people in the city, particularly those living in the most deprived areas of the city, don't have a strong sense of influence and control over their lives. And although the scope of this strategy is primarily around the infrastructure of community planning Aberdeen itself, we hope that the strategy has a broader impact on partners and more widely still. On the screen, you can hopefully see that we've highlighted some of the benefits of taking a strong community empowerment approach. We've said in the strategy that community empowerment places a focus on enabling and building strong personal and community resilience, where people have as much control over their lives as possible. It creates the conditions for individuals to come together and work together as a local community to influence and action improvements to their local environment. If you could move to the next slide, please. So one of the reasons why myself and Greg were particularly keen to be involved in the process of redeveloping the strategy was because we're particularly aware of some challenges that are faced by communities in involvement in processes to influence and to be involved, to participate. So there are many groups we know who have faced discrimination and disadvantage, both historically and ongoing. And we know that those groups are less likely to benefit if we take a level playing field type approach to community empowerment, where all individuals, groups and communities are treated the same. So we know that there are many groups who are more likely to have less time to take up engagement opportunities, for example, because they work longer hours or they have more likely to have caring responsibilities. We know that there's some practical barriers around awareness and understanding of community planning structures and partner processes. For example, those could be language barriers, other forms of accessibility, intercultural type issues or understanding of the system generally. And we know that there are many people more likely to be living in poor quality housing conditions, struggling to pay for food, heating and fuel, and therefore having to prioritise other things other than getting involved with community engagement and empowerment activity. We also felt as a group it was important to recognise the power imbalance between organisations like community planning partners and the community planning infrastructure itself, compared to small grassroots community groups that might want to get involved and have an influence. And so we believe that a genuine attempt at community empowerment must take into account and address these inequalities in its strategy and approach. And we therefore must understand the relevant inequalities experienced by our communities and take a proactive approach to address them. In terms of guiding principles, so on the screen here, you can see some of the legislative requirements that guide some of the principles of the strategy. And these touch on community planning Aberdeen's role in terms of enabling communities to participate and contribute, understanding the needs of communities, whether localities or other forms of communities, understanding the needs of ensuring community participation guides how we oversee performance and progress, and embedding a co-production approach. If you could go to the next slide, please. Here we've got the Grampian engagement standards. So these were developed and led by NHS Grampian engagement team based on the national standards for engagement. So we've included these. And also on the next slide, you can see the ladder of empowerment, which we've included to highlight the different rungs and types of ways in which communities can be involved. So we've included this both as a means of measurement within the strategy. So we'll be speaking later about some of the stretch outcome itself and some of the improvement projects. And so this is one of the key ways in which we're trying to measure our progress. So starting at looking at the activities that are existing and seeing how we can get further up this ladder, but also recognizing that a spectrum of activity is required, but overall aiming for higher up on this ladder. And as well as thinking about how this helps us measure our progress and benchmark where we are now, we also want these tools and other ones to be of use and utilised by community planning partners as well. And I'll stop there and hand over to Margaret.
Thanks, Dave. That's okay. So what Dave set out there are principles and standards that we hope that all partners can get behind, that can influence your individual practice, because obviously as single systems, we are all seeking to engage with our communities and with our citizens. So we hope that's useful to you and then you can get behind those. But this next section of the strategy is about what we do as a community planning partnership together. So again, as Dave has just said, we are using the ladder of empowerment to gauge where we are at the moment and try and start to get a sense of where we are. And I must say, and we set out in the strategy, that there will be different rungs of the ladder that are appropriate for different times. So it's not necessarily it is levels rather than steps up. At some points, informing and communicating is enough, but other times we're really seeking to have more collaboration with communities. And of course, ultimately, we hope that communities feel empowered to do things and make improvements for themselves. So what you're seeing on the screen and what's in our strategy is our current arrangements that we have as a community planning partnership that are shared. So you'll be really familiar with these. You'll have seen them and interacted with them at different times. Our locality empowerment groups are one of our newer arrangements in the partnership. These were set up in partnership with the Health and Social Care Partnership and our communities team. Other things that you're familiar with are City Voice, use of PB, our priority neighbourhood partnerships, all at different levels of the ladder. And we've tried to colour code that for you there. But the truth is that all of these mechanisms and forums will go up and down the ladder at different times. So that's where we're at. And if nothing else, the strategy provides clarity for communities and for partners about what those arrangements are and that we can all benefit from using. So that's where we are now, but where do we want to be? If you could go on to the next slide, thanks, Gogo. So this is us trying to take into community empowerment, which I think is easy to talk about and easy to get behind in principle, but to take it into improvement. So getting some rig around it to understand, well, if we're putting this investment and energy into community empowerment, how will we know if we've improved things? So very similar, as you know, to the approach we take with our local outcome improvement plan. And like our local outcome improvement plan, what we're seeking to do here is introduce a stretch outcome. So this strategy and our stretch outcome will sit alongside and complement the LOIP. The introduction of Stretch Come Out 16 seeks to increase by 100% the proportion of citizens who feel able to participate in decisions that help change things for the better. And that's by 2026, that's in line with our LOIP. Now, we had a huge amount of debate, and it has taken several months to get to this place where we're confident to take a strategy to you, because it can be very difficult to define what exactly community empowerment is. So we seek to do that in the strategy through description, but also through using data. We want to be able to see an improvement. Now, this stretch outcome is based around a recognised place standard question. We've asked it for the last 2 years as part of our City Voice panel questionnaire. So we do have baseline data for that. And our current baseline is 24%. So we asked that in the last questionnaire, and that was a dip from previous questionnaires. So our aim is to increase that by 100%. So we're looking for 48% improvement on that. Now, how do we measure it? Respondents to the questionnaire were asked to choose from a scale of 1 to 7 whether they felt that they were able to participate in decisions that help change things for the better. So like with all of our stretch outcomes, us as a community plan and partnership, we don't have overall control of whether people feel in control or for any of our outcomes, but this is about what we can influence and what we can work together to try and make an effort to improve. So thanks, Gogo. If you go on to the next slide. So within the strategy, you'll see that we've broken down that stretch outcome into 7 underpinning improvement projects, and they fall under 3 kind of what we call primary drivers or themes of better conditions for collaboration. So this is about making it easier, basically, for people and communities to work with Community Plan in Aberdeen to make improvements in their local area. But we also want to do something around supporting people to work together in their own community, access funding, and enable them to be more empowered. And we recognise that a third theme, a third driver is, of course, building people's capacity to do that. So our 7 improvement projects sit under those general themes. And for each project, we have identified a lead partner, and we have the commitment of those partners for you today. They have committed to taking a leading role in that. And I use the word leading role rather than project manager, because we do want to take a matrix management across our projects. That means all working together to progress, but we do have some lead sponsorship for each of our improvement projects just to make sure things progress. I'll not read through all of the improvement projects there for you, but that gives you an idea of the breadth of improvements that we're trying to make. If we can go on to the last slide, Gogo, if you've had a chance to look through the detail of the community empowerment strategy, you'll see that we've taken the same approach again as we do in the LOIP, setting that all out, the defined improvement aims. So what are we seeking to improve, by how much and by when? We've got baseline data in there. It's not all perfect, but for all projects, we have a starting point to be able to start to gauge improvement. We've presented it against the rungs of the ladder to show that spread in level of improvement that we're trying to seek. And we've also, as I said, there identified a lead partner. And I really wanted to highlight those lead partners for you today that have come forward. We've got the Council, we've got GREC, Police Scotland, NHS Grampian, Health and Social Care Partnership, ACFO, and we also have a new third sector partner that will be joining us to take a leading role on taking the strategy forward, which is SMU. And I really wanted to highlight those partners because not only have they been instrumental in the development of this plan, but we've got their ongoing commitment to take it forward. I'll just go on to the next slide. Thanks, Gogo. Thank you. So a last slide for me, knowing we're getting there. So as always, the plan is just the beginning. We've got a good concrete foundation, a specific goal to achieve. So how do we know where that you're getting there? Well, you'll receive updates for the Community Empowerment Group. We'll be working with our extended version of the group, which is our Community Empowerment Network, to oversee the development and the delivery of the strategy and the improvement projects. Again, as we do with the LOIP, we'll be taking a similar robust project management approach, and we'll be using quality improvement. So that means not just full-scale rolling out of ideas. We'll test them first. We'll make sure they work before we commit long-term resource. And many of those ideas have already come forward through the engagement exercise on this strategy from staff and community members. So we've got good ideas to start with to see how we can progress our improvement aims. And we'll use data, of course, and you will see that as part of the reports that come to the board, but also like all of the other stretch outcomes and outcome improvement groups, we too will have a data dashboard that will provide you with updates on progress. And I'll now just pass on to Margaret.
Thank you, Michelle. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay. To further bring the strategy to life and to support the improvement aims, a range of community tools, resources and support is included and will also be live within the Community Planning Aberdeen website. These provide clear routes to engagement, involvement and empowerment, linking community members, our community groups, associations and professionals to the local information and mechanisms to get involved. This is the live part of the strategy and will continue to evolve with partner support. Earlier work in the development of the strategy brought the Community Empowerment Group and Network together to create and share ideas, ambitions and question practice, all collated in one online space using Padlet, an online whiteboard. This was shared publicly and on social media and across all our networks for all to view, reflect on and contribute to. We want to keep the energy of that collaborative sharing and the ideas and information, and we're looking to translate that for the practical application that can be found in this toolkit here. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. Where do we go from here? We're here today to share the strategy with you, and we're going to use December to get the strategy out there, sharing across our networks through press and social media. This new year sees pace pick up on the improvement projects with engagement from project leads and other partners, community groups and associations. Having got some traction with the improvement projects, we aim to bring focus, engagement and inspiration around the strategy through a community empowerment conference. So we're looking at that for February, March time next year. The ongoing governance of the strategy will take place through the Community Empowerment Group with updates shared with the Community Empowerment Network and reporting to the Community Planning Board Aberdeen as part of the overall improvement project. That concludes our presentation and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that. That was really good. If I can maybe jump in first. I think during your presentation you said that the stretch outcome was starting from a base point of 24%, and it had dipped slightly from before. I wonder if you could just provide us with a little background as to, was that roughly where things had been in previous years, or do we not have any real data going backwards? If that's not too difficult, sorry.
No, we do actually have two earlier data points, which I will find if I don't have in this answer. But unfortunately, the question was asked in such a way that it was specific to the city centre, how people felt about that. It was slightly lower for those 2 years, but they're not quite comparable because obviously we're asking them to think more broadly than that. So we haven't included it as baseline data. But previously to that, we don't really have any other data that really captures that sense of control in a person's community.
No, that's absolutely great, and sorry for forgetting you got married. Sorry.
Sorry for correcting you.
I'll open it up to the floor. Councillor Gregg, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That's a very impressive document, and there's an enormous wealth of good information and good actions there. Could I ask for a little bit more on the locality empowerment groups, because I think that finding opportunities for success in tackling in improving inclusion, improving inclusion, sorry, tackling the inequalities will be something that happens at the local level, and I imagine that will have to be measurable in some way. And you outlined a format for measurement, which was about a citizen's sense of whether they felt empowered or not. So I wondered if we could have more information on locality empowerment groups, and also, is it possible to have a broader analysis of the impacts that are being made there beyond just what people are seeing? Does that make sense?
So in terms of the data, we do have that available at neighbourhood level, so we can certainly have a look at the data by neighbourhood. I think it's similar kinds of percentages, but there are some variation there, so we can help share that just for information. In terms of the actual locality empowerment groups, as you know, they've been tasked with developing and delivering our locality plans. I think there's work to be done to get the locality empowerment groups going. Again, there was some disruption, obviously, due to the pandemic. Once they got the plans in place, that was great, but just that disruption to how communities come together in their local neighbourhoods. So we've not explicitly focused within our improvement projects on particular mechanisms, and that was deliberate to open up our minds to how things could be done rather than working with current arrangements that may not be the right ones. That said, we do see locality empowerment groups as a priority, and after some disruption, my understanding is they will start again in the new year. The locality plan annual reports try to give that sense of broader outcomes in those locality areas. But the more that we work with communities and test their change ideas, the more we'll understand the impacts as a direct result of that.
Thank you very much. I think that it will be worthwhile to maybe do some scrutiny of what's happening at that local level, because that's obviously where it will be possible to make a difference. So that's something for us to think about for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Luann coming in remotely, and then I've got Councillor MacDonald. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Really important work, and really welcome the strategy today. Can we get invited to the conference, please? And when you have that next year, I'd be really keen to come to that and support this work. So that's my first ask. I've got two questions. One is maybe just a little bit similar to what Councillor Gregg was saying. I think we've got most to learn from people who have got multiple and complex needs. So I'm interested in how we'll monitor the quality of the engagement. So not just the numbers of people, but actually how we're reaching our people who you describe as maybe seldom heard voices, how we're reaching them and how they're going to be central to this. I think it's implied, but it would be interested to know just how that'll be monitored and measured. And then my second question is, how are people going to be connected with other training, employment opportunities as a result of being involved in community engagement activities? I'm just interested in how this connects. This has the potential to connect people with wider community planning activities to support some of our most vulnerable folks. So just looking for that connect with other training and employment opportunities. But thank you. Great to see this.
Thanks, Luann. And to answer your first question, of course you'll be invited. Would love to see you there. And if any partner would like to be involved in the planning of that conference, please let me know. In terms of your first question then about the quality being monitored and measured. So we don't have a huge amount of baseline data at the moment. We do have, I think it's probably a couple of years old now, an evaluation of the LLG stroke legs. However, going forward, that has to be one of the things that we're better at understanding the experience of those people that are involved in any of our mechanisms, whether it's groups or other ways that we engage with communities. So as you know from how we take forward the LOIP, this is just the top of the iceberg in a way. We will develop improvement project charters for each of our improvement project aims. And so there'll be a suite of measurement that sits under these high-level improvement aims that are presented within the strategy. So absolutely, we'll be looking for feedback and data to tell us about the quality of the experience and the engagement. And of course, that's really important for learning about what works and what doesn't and what we should continue to do. In terms of the second question, there's always been that desire. Obviously, we've got the various groups that we have to bring communities together. And we've also got our partnership groups taking forward the LOIP. So there has been an attempt in the last iteration of the locality plans to really join up the connections of the people that are on the locality empowerment groups, prior neighbourhood partnerships, with our wider community planning work. And you gave an example of training and employment there, but there's lots of opportunities right across all of our LOIP projects where we would value and benefit from hearing from the community. So we did introduce that community connector role so that they were a kind of bridge between our improvement projects and the communities working together on the ground. And that's one of the things that we recognise we've got, but we're not sure how well that's working. And there's lots of things that come into play about how big a task that feels for the community connector, what training and support that they have to undertake that role, and if it's a realistic role. So definitely trying to ultimately connect with what communities are doing on the ground and their ideas and bringing that into our professional partnership and making sure we're working with communities and acting on those ideas. So how we do that is part of the strategy about how we explore and improve. That answers your questions.
It does, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor MacDonald, thanks.
Thanks, Chair. And I suppose thank you so much for the strategy in front of us. And I guess I'd like to start maybe just with a comment around community empowerment, community planning, and that's around the definitions, which have over the last 2-3 decades that we've been growing and changing how we interact with our communities is that word communities itself. And it was interesting as you went through your presentation that words like individuals, groups, communities, members, and so on. And so sometimes in that tapestry of community planning, those do get a bit meshed up as people tend to think of a community sometimes geographically, or they might think a community of interest and all the rest of it. So just, you know, with that as being my sort of take on the different strands going forward, I just a couple of questions really. Ladders, as we know, go up and down, and also, you know, there's a few snakes in there as well sometimes, and you know, COVID could be seen as being one of those where, you know, things tend to slide down the ladder a little bit if we're looking to have those steps up. So you know, I think that's worth bearing in mind, and I'm sure that's kind of factored in, although maybe not you know, seen in the strategy as such. And I don't know if that can be, you know, maybe reflected a little bit more. And my second point was around how resource intensive this type of work is. It really is. It has changed, of course, with the digital platforms that we have, but it's still to really drill down and to get people involved takes a lot of resource. And so I'm just my question is really how confident we are that the strategy can be underpinned, you know, with enough resource to make it work. Thirdly, I suppose the test change ideas. It's always good to have that loop so that people can see where their ideas have gone and what outcomes there are at the end of it. And lastly, really a question around comms. I note from the comms plan in the report that this is going to start fairly soon in terms of the comms going out, and I do wonder if it might get lost in amongst the you know, the Christmas buzz that is around there. So I was also maybe wondering whether not having the website up until next year is the right way around, and whether, you know, some thought can be given to that, because if you want people, you know, to go straight away to the website, because I think using digital means will be key to the success of the strategy. If there's any thoughts on this, would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll just respond to the question and the point around about the issues that might kind of take us down the ladder or prevent people from getting involved and engaged. That's something that we were really mindful and thought was important to include, was that sense of kind of hierarchy of needs that people have at a time, and kind of being attuned to that and listening and being more, making sure that the work that's happening at a strategic level is really understanding and hearing the reality of what's happening with communities. So so that we don't have expectations that are too high when people might be focused on, particularly at this time of the year, like thinking about heating bills and the cost of living, but thinking about how we adjust the approach so that the level or the barrier to being involved is lower at those points. But also being more mindful and thinking more about the existing ways in which communities are organising or supporting each other in more grassroots ways than just the formal ways in which we're understanding community involvement at the moment. So like the legs being an example of that, or so trying to map out and understand those more informal ways in which communities are existing, and tapping into that and seeing where that work within communities can be supported, rather than starting something from scratch that's more like a top-down approach. So yeah.
I'll just sort of pick up on the community resources that we have within the toolkit, and I suppose kind of reflecting on what you were saying about individuals and communities and associations. I think we hope that within our toolkit, and if you have an explore around that, there are kind of clear ways in which people can get involved as individuals. There's information about the groups that are available. So whether it's about you as an individual taking part in that, or as a professional understanding how all these mechanisms come together. So we hope that through that that people can kind of navigate their way into community involvement and then moving into empowerment as well. I'll also kind of reflect on the comment about the comms, and yeah, and rightly, recognise that there's an awful lot of information that's around at the moment, and there's a risk that we may not kind of capture people's imagination right now in the busyness of Christmas. We are looking to really kind of launch the strategy in terms of the improvement projects from the new year. So yeah, we'll definitely reflect on our comms approach around that as well, whether we share kind of a soft launch and then really kind of amplify that in the new year. Thanks.
Thanks, and I'll just pick up on your last points, Councillor MacDonald. In terms of reporting back on tests of change and the change ideas from communities, that's really important. And it sounds obvious, but it's probably something we're not very good at the moment. So that will be a change idea in itself for how we take forward the strategy and how much we're reporting back to communities about what's happened with those ideas and where we are with them, and seeking their involvement if there are any refinements or barriers that we need to discuss how we can make that work. So absolutely, that's definitely a priority. And also the website, yeah, I think it's just a timing thing because we're moving on to a new platform. It's not ideal, but we will improve the online presence at the moment so that people can still go there in the meantime, and we just expect it to be looking better in the new year.
Thank you very much. Do you want to come back at all, Councillor MacDonald? I was quite a lot in your question. There was quite a lot in the answer, just in case you wanted to come back.
There was. I suppose the only thing that I did think about in the answers was that there is quite often a degree of community fatigue in consultation and getting involved, and quite often it does tend to be the same people involved. So I think we've got an opportunity to refresh that, to widen it out, and I think getting that out to all 45 councillors and as partners and staff and then all the other different agencies and partners that are in this room and so on. I think we're all of us. This is our New Year resolution, I think, to make this work, make it happen, and to empower people to really step up and get their voices heard. I've done it for a long time, certainly with women, and I just think we just need to build on what has been a lot of good work over many years. We're not starting from something fresh, but it needs to be refreshed, I think.
No, thank you for that. I totally agree with your comments, and I think it's down to us all to play an important part here. I've got two more people asking questions. Susan Webb first, and then Paul O'Connor. Thanks.
Thanks very much, and thank you very much for the paper. I think, as you have stated, it is incredibly difficult to measure the impact. I guess one of the areas that I'm curious about is that a number of times we get fed back that how we as organisations sometimes act as disablers to meaningful engagement, and I just wonder how we might capture how community planning works, how individual agencies work, that might get in the way of supporting the ambition in the strategy.
Michelle, do you want to take that one?
Trust Susan Webb to come up with a difficult question for me. How do we capture it? I mean, that's how we're going to explore it, because we've got some joint arrangements there, but you can't get away from the fact that the single system arrangements are all part of to play as well. And especially as we seek to move forward together, we'll learn from each other's practices and engagement, and I'm sure we'll get into the nitty-gritty of that. And we've already got feedback from the community members that are engaged, that have maybe been more engaged with a certain part of the system. So thinking about maybe some of our colleagues that have been more aligned to the Health and Social Care Partnership, or others that have been more experienced in with some of the council's engagement practice. And I think there's learning for us all there. So it's about kind of really taking the lessons from it. And as we progress with our joint arrangements, learning from that, and then it feeds back into individual systems so we can understand what we can do better. I guess that's the period of exploration we're going to go through together and with communities. But as Councillor MacDonald says, this is a real commitment now to look at some of these long-standing issues. We all know about the engagement fatigue. We've talked about it at length and how that exists, but this is a signal in our commitment to knowing that that's the situation, but what fresh thinking, what can we do to overcome that and move forward?
Thank you, Susan. Do you want to come back on that?
No, because I didn't mean it to be an unfair question. I think if the purpose is engage to empower, then actually at some point we will need to have a conversation about maybe some difficult feedback that we might get as a result of this. And I think it's just accepting that from the outset. But, you know, as I say, great piece of work. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much, Michelle, Margaret and Dave and Maggie for ACFO for creating this strategy. And I think as Councillor MacDonald says, we're no starting from scratch. There's a hell of a lot of good work going across all various platforms for community councils, civic forums and many others across the city. I think there's a couple of observations. You know, I really like your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities and threats. And I suppose as a comment, you know, when people in communities, and particularly in grassroots level, see major decisions gone against them, against the explicit will of the residents, and I could come away with a huge amount of examples in that, not just my own community, you do lose the buy-in from people. So I think collectively, all of us as partners, we've got work to do in that. And I think that's a conversation we've been having at ACFO. As Dave will testify, is how do we better reach out and make sure that we get as much feedback and good data as possible. So I'm quite delighted with this. I think the comment there is that the legs for me, if I look at all the communities that I work with, they are on the priority-based communities. And the locality plans likewise. So you don't get data as much as we should have from the communities who do feel a little bit left out, where their views are not being taken on board. And I've made that comment several times over the last few years that it is about priority communities and there's a resource issue there. But if we have locality plans for every community in Aberdeen, then you're getting good feedback, good buy-in, good cooperation, and people participating where they feel their views are taken on board. So I don't know how we do that, and else there's a significant resource put in for every community to have a locality plan, and people really feeding in and engaging. But overall, a really good thing, and I think we take on a lot what you're saying, and I think ACFO will also strongly engage. So it was good to see Maggie part of that as well as Dave. So thank you for what you're doing. And I suppose that is that challenge that people do feel that decisions, even though that they are feeding into the bigger system, it doesn't always go with what the community wants. And I feel I'm compelled to say that, otherwise I'd be remiss in me sitting here. So collectively, not just yourselves, we've got a good bit of work to do, but as Sandra said, it's no starting for the beginning. So I think you have the complete buy-in of ACFO to work with you, and I would like an invite as well to that event. Thank you, Michelle.
Do you want to come back on any of that?
I think just picking up on your point about the locality empowerment groups and the locality plans. I mean, the locality plans are intended to cover all neighbourhoods within the city. However, it is a bit chicken and egg because we rely on those locality empowerment groups. So if you don't have the representation on those groups, then you're not going to see the priorities come forward within the locality plans. So quite rightly, the locality plans do have a focus on our priority neighbourhood partnership, priority neighbourhoods in some areas where the data is telling us those are where the greatest issues of need are. However, in terms of that community feed-in about what their priorities and thoughts are, I absolutely take on board your feedback, and that's part of the strategy to explore how we get that. Is it through the locality empowerment groups or is it through other means?
Thanks, Michelle. I feel really strongly about the legs is definitely not gaining the participation of those out with the priority groups, and I'm testament to that myself with my own day job. But there is an opportunity, and I think that's the entire point of your strategy, is that we're recognising one size doesn't fit all, but there is a huge amount of will there. Your strengths there is the active citizenships and the community groups. We've got a hell of a lot of buy-in across Aberdeen, and it's so positive, and it's actually great to see what the communities achieve when they're empowered. And the final wee point, if the chair doesn't mind there's another section of the community empowerment which has kind of been missed out here, is your participation requests and the asset transfers. I think there's an opportunity as we move down the line with the community empowerment of these communities to own the assets. But the point I would like to make there, because when I first got involved in that, the principal ethos of the council was to enforce asset transfer, not the actual spirit of the bill. So there's real opportunities there, and I think Fitty was an example of that, where people felt listened to and they've taken on ownership and asset and been very successful. So thanks, Michelle. I'm really keen to get involved with us.
Thanks very much for that, Paul. Jonathan, thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. Just first of all, to say certainly on behalf of the Civic Forum, I know this view is shared by the majority of community councils who are aware and engaged with community planning as well. It's been fantastic, I think, to see since the Community Empowerment Act became formalised, in fact, even before then, that Aberdeen has been very much at the forefront of the national picture in just what's possible with community empowerment. And it's fantastic to see that renewed refresh now on how Councillor MacDonald had says we build on that legacy. We had mentioned two sometimes the same individuals who remain involved, me being one of them, Paul perhaps another. And I like that the strategy speaks to actually what do we do with that? How do we rely upon it and actually make an ask of those individuals, those community councillors, those community centre operators, management groups, what have you, to go out to their community to help generate that interest, that trust, to come along and be part of it. But at the same time, as Luann and Susan had said, how do we expand from there? How do we look at those who are harder to hear from, who feel least listened to, who may feel geographically or otherwise that decisions have been taken whenever, it could have been 60 years ago, last week, or feel something in the way that they may not agree with, but be part of the process, help to inform it, help to shape it. And I think that's something we're succeeding with as well. The last point I was going to make is on, I think just prior to COVID, actually, there was a report commissioned by the then Communities Minister that had worked very closely with SCVO, with ACVO and others across Scotland on the resource of volunteering. One of the barriers that we see, which is a good barrier to have, is that when people get to a point of strength, of capability, of confidence, they move into part-time to full-time employment. As a result of that, our volunteering resource base dries up. So that's something perhaps we could look at later down the line when it comes to the delivery of the strategy, of the toolkit with communities. We probably will still have that same core cohort, like Paul, like myself, a couple of others in the room who can help rally people around. But I think there is that question mark in front of us that the appetite is there. But when it comes to people's time and what they can dedicate, there has to be that rolling conversation on the refreshed cohort that we bring in to dedicate their time to volunteering. And hopefully, again, that diminishes as people move on, new people come in. It can be evolving across that ladder, up and down on that scale, depending on where people are on life. So again, there may not be a set answer to that. It's going to be an evolving one, but I think important we keep asking that to make sure that what looks and will likely look initially like success isn't a static base of volunteering that may in a couple of years' time dry up without that active nurturing of the people who are part of it.
Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. I totally agree with what you've said. You know, fundamentally, we always have to be nurturing and bringing on the next cohort to take on. Michelle, do you want to come back on any of that? Thanks.
No, I think it's so important. As you say, and when you were talking there, Jonathan, about that, it struck me the progress we've made as a community planning partnership, where we've set out our aims for improvement, and we have a blueprint for what we plan to do. And that's kept us resilient when there have been inevitably changes in staff. There's a lot of movement within our organisations and people move on. But with our LOIP and our improvement project charters, we've got that clarity of what we were seeking to do with as part of our multi-agency teams. I think that's really helped with that shift and change in people. So there's something about that for our volunteers as well, and making sure that they have the right package around them to be nurtured and supported as they take the baton, as it were. So absolutely. And again, these are all things that will translate to change ideas that we will test as part of our improvement projects. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I have no more questions on my list. Anyone else? I'm not seeing any hands in the room, and I'm not seeing anything on the board. The recommendations are on page 46, and they are to endorse the draft community empowerment strategy at Appendix 1, which we've seen. Endorse the proposal to introduce a 16th stretch outcome as part of the strategy, and agree the delivery of the strategy and achievement of stretch outcome 16 will be led by the Community Empowerment Group working with the wider Community Empowerment Network. And finally, request partner organisations to take the strategy through their own governance structures for endorsement and alignment to individual approaches and plans. Can we agree the recommend? Oh, Councillor MacDonald.
I just wondered, Chair, whether we could strengthen number 4 and ask partner organisations to champion the strategy rather than just take, if you're agreeable to that.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. Can we agree with that minor change to champion? Thank you very much. And with that, we'll move to item 3.1, the CPA Improvement Programme Quarterly Update and Appendices, and I'll hand over to Mrs. Swanson.
Thanks, Chair. The board have before it the overview of progress of our 75 improvement aims. At Appendix 1, members can see that 74 of our 75 improvement aims are progressing or have had project end reports approved. Of those 74, 17 improvement aims have now been achieved. We've had 6 project end reports approved, and you have a further 2 project end reports on today's agenda. For 2022, we have 14 further aims to be achieved. However, data for some of those aims are based on the financial or academic year and therefore won't be available until later in 2023. Overall, our projects are progressing, and where projects have a red status and or they have baseline data still outstanding, support is being provided by the chairs of our outcome improvement groups and also by the community planning team. One project charter is still due to be submitted, and that was discussed by the board at its last meeting. The current status of that remaining project charter is detailed at paragraph 8.1 of the report, and you'll see there that the board are asked to note that work is being progressed to confirm a revised aim for the number of children and young people with an eating disorder who are identified within 3 months of onset is increased by 50% by 2023. And we're saying there that that revised aim will be circulated electronically prior to Christmas to the board. And we're asking for the board to agree to delegate authority to the chair of the board and the chair of the management group to approve the revised aim to enable that to be progressed and a charter submitted to the next board meeting for consideration. Finally, in terms of the overview, at Stretch Outcome 15, I wanted to highlight that subject to the project end report for project 15.2 on today's agenda being approved, 2 of the 3 aims will have been achieved and the project's ended. In light of that, the management group have asked the Sustainable City Group to consider whether further improvement activity was required at this time to support achievement of the Stretch Outcome 15 and to submit proposals to a future meeting. And Sinclair Lane will speak further about stretch outcome 15 and one of the change ideas at Appendix 4. Chair, I'll take any questions on Appendix 1 at this time, and then if you're happy, we can move on to Appendix 2, where we have two of our project managers present to speak to the case studies.
Thank you very much for that. I think that's a good idea. If we take them by the different groups. So if we have any questions on the report or Appendix 1 for Mrs. Swanson, please. Oh, Jonathan, thank you.
Hopefully Appendix 1, am I right in thinking it's the table with the list, or is that the next part? So the question was, I think in the list there was a handful, I think maybe 5 or 6 that had listed that the project was impacted by the absence of a PM, I'm guessing project manager. And I just wondered whether that was a skills and capability issue in terms of what project management is, the confidence for colleagues to take on that role, or was it a resourcing barrier in terms of partners being able to dedicate the time of staff to take that position on?
Through you, Chair. In terms of the absence of the project manager, that was meaning that the project manager had a period of absence and therefore was unable to progress the project in that time. For some of those projects, the project team have still continued to meet to progress it, but have been impacted. But in all of those cases, I believe the project managers are now back and in post.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any hands and I'm not seeing anything on the board. So with that, we'll go to the second appendix, which is the case studies. And I was going to take 7.2 first. So we have Leona McDermott from the foyer and Mark Jones from ACC here. Do you want to take us through the report first and then we can have questions? Thanks.
Delighted to. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leona McDermott and I'm the Chief Executive of Aberdeen Foyer. I'm also joined by Mark Jones from Education, who leads the Attainment and Transitions Group within the LOIP. The Foyer provides a range of supports and resources all aimed towards ending youth homelessness and alleviating the impact of poverty on young people and adults across the region. And our work supports and feeds into a number of community planning priorities. This particular project that we're here to talk about today sits under Stretch Aim 7, which alludes to the fact that the aim is targeting that 95% of all our children, including those living in our priority neighbourhoods, will sustain a positive destination upon leaving school. The current charter was developed to meet the aim of increasing the number of vulnerable learners entering a positive destination by 7%. The test of change highlighted in the case study today focuses on how the earlier identification of risk by young people themselves might impact on improving access to support and subsequently on the number of young people from priority areas moving into and sustaining positive destinations on leaving education. This test of change also links to the Stretch Aim 11.5 around reducing youth homelessness by 6% too. So what did we do and why, I think is the main thing. In the summer of 21, we had started to move forward from COVID. And at that point in time, there were multiple initiatives aimed at supporting young people transition back to school and on into positive destinations. We were looking for a way of being able to identify risk earlier so that supports could repattern around each young person more effectively. The Foyer had been inspired by Upstream Australia, more commonly known as the Geelong Project, which located near Melbourne. Upstream is a collaborative early intervention approach that enables schools and supporting services to work with young people who are at risk of homelessness or disengagement from school before they reach crisis point. Universal screening is offered to young people in school using an evidence-based survey tool that identifies risk factors associated with homelessness, mental health well-being, resilience, and also engagement in education. This approach has led to coordination across whole communities and support services to respond collectively to the needs of young people, often before crisis point, and has generated true youth-led early intervention. Within 3 years, Upstream Australia had achieved a 40% reduction in youth homeless presentations and a 50% reduction in school disengagement from the most at-risk young people. Slamai, another youth homeless charity in Wales, along with Cardiff University, were also inspired by this example and have been piloting Upstream Wales across 6 secondary schools in the Cardiff area since January 2020 to great effect. Upstream has also inspired different groups in Canada, again with positive results. This universal approach sets Upstream apart from other interventions as it also identifies students who do not necessarily display any outward signs of risk and may be experiencing barriers that we're not aware of. In Wales, for instance, 65% of those young people identified as at high risk were on no one's radar. Going back to the summer of 21, with schools stretched and unable to take on another pilot, NESCOL identified Upstream as a potential solution to an ongoing issue in their Altons campus, where take-up of student support was historically very low. This site was chosen as students tend to be younger and under 18 and younger, and also have a higher proportion of term time leavers and winter leavers. A pilot was quickly agreed and Upstream Wales licensed the survey. So what we actually did, so it wasn't the FOI themselves, it was NESCOL, so it was a real partnership approach to this. NESCOL worked with ourselves and Upstream Wales to be able to deliver the first survey to 148 students in December last year. 43 students were immediately followed up with and had been identified as being at high risk. 10 referrals were made to counselling, wellbeing and study skills, and one young person was able to be moved towards safer living arrangements who had been at risk of homelessness. NESCOL were able to follow up with students again throughout January. In April 22, 95 students again took part in the Upstream survey. 53 of whom had also taken part in the survey in December, so we were able to then begin to correlate any improvements between the December and the April surveys. In terms of improvements, what was seen was a reduction in the risk of homelessness. There was a reduction in the risk of disengagement. A couple of case studies to demonstrate that was one in particular. A young person was struggling with low self-esteem. After the survey, it was identified the student had dyslexia. After further conversations, and would benefit from alternative assessment arrangements and study skill appointments. This was put in place and the student passed their subsequent assessments and stayed engaged and completed their college course. In both surveys, low well-being was the main reason for students requiring support as well, and many received follow-up phone calls as a result of that risk being identified. There was also further input from the student wellbeing teams as well, student support too in and around the campus, and heightening activities around mental health and wellbeing as well. What was very critical as well to all of this was the relationship, and what hadn't necessarily been anticipated was the real huge strides and improvement of the relationships between curriculum and support teams, who really started to see the value in the process, finding it easy to implement and be able to have the survey provided a catalyst for conversation. In terms of the referrals for support, it increased by 145% on previous years. As NESCOL staff said, if we know who is at risk, we can act. So next steps, coming back to the original aim, Upstream offers a collaborative youth-led approach to targeting support and resources, which could add support to implementation of, for instance, the new prevention duties around homelessness and to earlier interventions that supplement a whole family support model. But in terms of next steps, next immediate steps, we're pleased to say that NESCOL will have continued to use the Upstream survey on the Altons campus, and we're just waiting for results coming back from them. and they are also wanting to potentially expand the use of upstream into another department. One of the unanticipated factors was the correlation of impact on young people. So the student support services use a different database than your academic outcomes. So trying to correlate the two would involve a lot of hand-drawn paperwork at the moment. So when we run it again, we're looking at ways around that that makes that so much easier to be able to correlate. You've had that support, what impact does it have on your educational outcome? So, and the other piece of good news that has just been put in place literally in the last few days has been an initial approval to explore the use of using the upstream survey as part of the 2 new pilots of multidisciplinary teams in Northfield and Lochside schools. We're just awaiting confirmation from Upstream Wales with regards to the licensing, which we have some funding through our reboot programme at the FOI that would be able to support that if required. There's a couple of other things as well that have emerged under this under 7.2 as well, and I'm going to hand to Mark to pick up on those as well.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Leona, and just acknowledge the leadership and partnership work that's gone on so far. Just by way of context, the challenge to reduce the poverty-related attainment gap and improve on positive destinations for our most vulnerable young people can't and doesn't just rest with one project aim, and there are a variety of initiatives that sit alongside the work in this case study. As Leona has identified, an important next step, having tested the use of upstream in a further education setting, is to test this in a school context, thus the plan to pilot upstream within cohorts at Lochside and Northfield academies. A further test of change is being planned to introduce into this project the role of a pathways advocate for all secondary schools, where a seconded individual 1 day per week will track, monitor and support our most vulnerable young people in terms of their future plans and progress. There's believed to be a room for some additional support and provision that exists between the pastoral role and also the role of the careers advisor and other agencies that exist within school, to allow young people to become confident and move on to their positive destinations. So this is an exciting new test of change that will be coming into this particular project. Just as a demonstration of the fact that work in this area isn't limited within one project, just would like to highlight the work that's going on in an initiative entitled ABZ Campus, where all 11 secondary schools are working together with partners like North East Scotland College and other delivery partners to provide a range of new growth sector aligned courses for 2023-24. And part of this is to ensure that we have a range of courses and a breadth of courses for all young people, including our most vulnerable. So one example of this is a partner-led employability course where both certification and work experience will sit alongside each other, culminating in a guaranteed job interview, and that's due to be piloted for next session. So I trust this has given you a brief window, both in terms of next steps with this project and also an example of the wider work to support our young people into positive and sustained destinations. And I'd like to commend the case study to you and the wider work in relation to the partners that have been involved in this team. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor MacDonald, I've got you first. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, with the original students, and then were they self-selecting, or was there a particular year intake that was targeted for that? And secondly, were there any observations made around whether some of the female or male students had different well-being issues that they had that you know surfaced as being things to tackle, or were they just generally the isolation, which can be for either?
The survey itself was applied universally at the Altons campus, and it tends to be, because of the nature of the courses taught there, it tends to be more male oriented, and also males tend to be aged between 15 and 18. It tends to be a younger population as well. So very, very small number of females actually on the campus. So it was applied universally to as many students as possible on during a period of a week or two, where it was done through students coming into classes and just done online. So so in terms of the picking a particular year group, I think it was more around those involved on the campus at the time. In terms of the differences in relation to the type of mental health issues, we didn't gather data around that. That would have been for the college to then work out what would have worked best with each individual. So unfortunately, I can't answer that one.
Thank you.
If I can maybe just come back before I try and take anyone else in. We're speaking about now rolling on to perhaps Lochside and Northfield, and picking up on the point that Councillor MacDonald was making there. I wonder if it would be possible as part of your project to specifically, perhaps, when going to those schools, look at things such as gender impact, because obviously, as you were saying, Nescol has a predominantly male cohort, and obviously when we go into a secondary school, we've got a much more representative male-female gender balance. And I think, you know, we hear anecdotally about all sorts of things perhaps having more impact on one group than another. And I just wondered if it would be possible for you to consider that as part of your study. And my second part would be to obviously ask that you take your results back to us, because I think that would be a really interesting piece of work for us to hear about. But I wonder if we could maybe just have a little comment from yourself in and around that. Thanks.
I think being able to pick up on the gender impact shouldn't be a problem. It will be either the schools or the college who holds the data that is gathered through Upstream Wales. So again, it's about working in partnership to be able to unpack it a little bit in terms of what type of issues are being raised, and also what support mechanisms then come into play in and around that. What I would say is this is the very first time this has been done in the UK. So this is a first in relation to this, and it's generating interest from wider field in terms of how this could be replicated in other areas. What I would say at this stage is we've not actually landed it in the secondary school yet, which is what it was designed to do. So again, this was really a very much learning around does this as a mechanism work in terms of allowing or enabling young people a different mechanism in which to say there's something going on in my life that I'm not quite dealing with. So really it's a mechanism, and the important part is how the support repatterns around each young person, and how quickly, you know, the survey results can be ready within a few days, and they're attributed to each individual. So a head teacher would be able to know if it was a particular pupil who had a particular issue, and be able to approach that pupil immediately. So I think that there's an immediate element around it that offers huge flexibility, but also allows young people who maybe don't have a voice at the moment, or don't even realise they need a voice at the moment, to be able to come to light. I think I had mentioned that in Wales, 65% of those at high risk were on no one's radar. And I think if we're truly going to try and tackle this as early intervention, then this does offer a mechanism that might help with that.
Thank you for that. I think that would be really helpful. Councillor Gregg, thanks.
Yeah, just kind of following up on that. I think it will be helpful for us to see follow-up report with an evaluation at later stages. And in particular, it would be useful to know how upstream will relate to the other prevention and early intervention activities, especially in some of the Lochside, for example, or Northfield. Will that be possible? Because I think that there's real promise here for us to find out really positive ways of finding positive destinations. Yeah.
Want to come back on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, absolutely. I think we're keen to learn from all aspects of the work that we're doing and see how they can come together.
I'm just on that. I'm just wondering if upstream relies on resource. Does it rely on the partnership support from NESCOL and others? Is that something that needs encouraging?
In terms of the cost, at the moment there is a very small, reasonable cost for the license, which is for the survey itself, which is managed by, it's actually Cardiff University who've pioneered the survey in the UK and developed it for UK purposes. So, for instance, the mental health aspect is based on WIMWebs, which is a very, it's an evidence-based, very well-known tool, and other aspects as well, and they correlate between each other. So they have a license fee, which NESCOL met themselves. We have a kind of ongoing early intervention project that's funded for the next year, but we would have a little bit of funding to be able to put towards schools if they wanted to trial it, which we're doing just now. Where the funding requirement happens is around the resource for support. The actual survey itself is just the catalyst. The survey itself can be rolled out very quickly, but it's what you do with the information and how you repattern support around it and how you prioritise resources. So if you know that in a particular class in S2 that there's a problem with bullying, you can target that class, for instance, very quickly. If you know that there's 5 of your pupils who have identified risk of homelessness within the family home, or they themselves are at risk of homelessness, then again you can move on that quite quickly, and so that you're reducing the risk around disruption of education. So it's the mechanism that the resource really comes in the shape and form of the support mechanisms that sit around.
Thank you for that. Do you want to come back, Councillor Gregg? No. Okay, Councillor Radley.
My question has just been answered, but I might follow up. I'm very pleased to see the rollout in some of our secondary schools, and I'm hopeful that the mechanisms, the support mechanisms we've got in place at the moment will actually help to feed into the sort of information we get back, and I will be very interested to see the results that do come back from that survey. My question was around sort of the where we'll test next. So you've said some of the difficulties students were experiencing could have been resolved earlier had they been identified during their time in school, but you've just answered sort of the difficulties that you are seeing, and I'm hopeful that the introduction of this in secondary schools will be a positive step, and hopefully that sort of future prevention as well will come into that. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. It's mere a comment that to say well done to the FOIA and NESCOL for doing this. For any as that work with young folk, if you get early intervention and even one life changed, is a huge impact possibly for the rest of their life. We've sadly seen when young people become homeless and the impact that has for many years. So it's well done and quite exciting as well, I would say, to see how this is going to roll out. And if you need any support for reaching out to other resources, ACFO can help promote that and reach out with you. So not just a comment and saying well done and thank you, because it does make a massive difference when you help these young people.
Thank you very much. We're very excited about this. What I would say is that this next test of change is done on a limited number of young people. It's not a universal rollout just yet, but they'll be learning from it, and so it's about taking that learning to the next stage as well. So thank you for your support.
Thank you very much. Have we got? Oh, Councillor MacDonald, thanks.
Yeah, I was just to say I think that's really important, because if there is unmet need out there and we don't then have the wherewithal to really have that wraparound support, which we will have to have, then we really need to be mindful of that. And we also need to be mindful, I guess, we've had other strands of community planning coming to us about where young people have been picked up through different avenues, whether it's through the NHS or whether it's through housing or whatever. And so the work is happening as well. But this is a different way of slicing and dicing it, and I think is as Paul said, to be commended, and to keep an eye as well on what's happening around the world, because there are often good ideas elsewhere that we can always use if it's going to suit us here in Aberdeen. And yeah, this definitely sounds like a good project to keep an eye on.
Thank you very much for that. I'm not seeing any more hands in the room or on the screen. So with that, can I thank Leona and Mark for your presentation? I think that was absolutely excellent, and hopefully we will see you back before long, being able to give us some further insights into the work you're doing, because I really do think that's a very, very interesting piece of work that could produce some very interesting results for young people. So thank you for that. And I'll move on to 10.6, which deals with the increase by 15% victims of domestic abuse receiving support by 2022. And I have Lucy Simpson to provide some background to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my name is Lucy Simpson, and I'm a Development Officer for Domestic Abuse, Alcohol and Drugs with Aberdeen City Council. And part of my role also involves coordinating our Violence Against Women partnership in Aberdeen. So we've been looking at increasing by 15% the victims of domestic abuse receiving support by 2022, which comes under Stretch Outcome 10, 25% fewer people receiving a first court conviction and 2% fewer people reconvicted within 1 year by 2026. Just to give a bit of background and context as to why we've been focusing on this particular issue. So in 2020, 2021, we had 2004 people reach out or referred to specialist support services because of domestic abuse. And at that time, that accounted for 76% of recorded incidents of domestic abuse by police. However, we know that domestic abuse statistics do not reveal the true incidence of domestic abuse, since not all incidents are reported to police, and as a result of the hidden nature of the crime. Despite this, these statistics do help us to assess the extent and impact of domestic abuse in Scotland. And it gives us kind of the various reasons for why underreporting is so prevalent within this area. So things like victims' experience of police, fear and shame as a common effect of domestic abuse, but also it may be caused by the accused physically preventing a victim from reporting abuse. We also know with the changes to legislation around coercive control, many victims of domestic abuse haven't actually realised that what they're experiencing has been abuse because of the lack of physical abuse within relationships. So awareness raising around that has been key to this project as well. One area in which we saw a significant underreporting of domestic abuse was with young people aged 16 to 25. Young people impacted directly by domestic abuse by a partner or ex-partner continue to be the hidden victims of domestic abuse, with only 1% of those aged under 18 accessing support services. And this is despite young people experiencing the highest rate of domestic abuse by any age group, as seen in a study by Safe Lives. Another recent study, which was actually conducted in Aberdeen by Safe Lives with young people, found that the majority of young people surveyed were aware of what domestic abuse was and were confident in identifying abusive behaviours. However, they were unsure of how to actually access support. And local statistics further highlighted this, with 241 young people seeking support from local services in 2020. And this accounted for only 11% of those seeking domestic abuse support in Aberdeen. In addition, the young people that participated in the study in Aberdeen stated that their main reason for not seeking support was shame. So again, awareness raising around reducing the stigma of seeking support for domestic abuse was going to be key to the project team to ensure that young people would get the support that they needed. So we know that domestic abuse is widespread across the city, but also that there's a higher preponderance for abuse in areas of deprivation and a correlation between domestic abuse and severe and multiple disadvantages. And that includes those who misuse substances such as drugs and alcohol. And we know that many of those cases, often the issues around their substance use takes priority over domestic abuse. So that's why we were looking to try and increase awareness around substance misuse services on the issues around domestic abuse. Families also live with domestic abuse for a significant period of time before getting help. In Scotland, this is up to 4 years before people actually seek support, which is higher than the average of 3 years in England and Wales. So again, really looking at how do we increase people's knowledge of domestic abuse, increase their knowledge of support services, and encourage those who are living with abuse to seek support. So in terms of what we then tested, because of the underreporting by young people, we look specifically at awareness raising sessions with students, and we held 5 sessions initially with students, with 50 plus students at each session, just looking at what domestic abuse was, what their awareness of that was, and their confidence around what support services were in the area. We also looked at domestic abuse sessions led by domestic abuse champions in areas of youth justice and children and young persons, residential staff, again, to increase knowledge of the young person's experience of abuse and where and how to refer young people to support. We've developed a domestic abuse champions model and recruited a number of volunteers to increase the confidence of referring not just young people to support, but all people experiencing domestic abuse to support. Our domestic abuse champions received an in-depth train the trainer programme by Safe Lives, giving them the ability to then deliver training to their colleagues and services to increase knowledge of domestic abuse, know how to recognise the signs and to signpost onto support. And then we also looked at in-depth training with staff from substance misuse services around offering, again, knowledge on how to refer their clients onto support and recognising the signs of domestic abuse alongside the use of drugs and alcohol and how that might kind of factor into abusive behaviours. So we held 3 full-day domestic abuse sessions with a total of 45 staff members from substance misuse services receiving training. This has been really positive overall, with our aim having been achieved, with a 47% increase in the number of victims of domestic abuse receiving support. So from 2004 and 2020, 2021, we're now seeing 2,945 people seeking support in 2021, 2022. And this actually accounts for 113% now of those reporting to police. So domestic abuse statistics were released yesterday, and we've seen a decrease in the number of people reporting incidents of domestic abuse in the city. This may not be a positive in terms of how many people we're seeing actually coming through for support. So there maybe needs to be some work done there around why people aren't reporting to police. In addition, we've seen 40% of an increase in the number of young people accessing domestic abuse support and 24% increase of adults accessing support in 2021-2022, where age has been recorded. At our online awareness raising sessions with students, we asked pre and post training questions, and an average of 68% of students at the end of these sessions reported an increased awareness of local services. And since the session started, we've seen an increase in the number of young people accessing domestic abuse support, with a high of 37 in April 2022, which kind of came to the end of our testing period. We've had 18 domestic abuse champions established and completed in-depth domestic abuse training, and this includes staff from our housing and support team, our repairs team, duty social work, libraries and community learning and development. And again, just trying to reach those staff members who are maybe coming into contact with people experiencing abuse, who maybe wouldn't normally go to specialist support services. As I said, we've had 45 substance misuse staff completed in-depth training since September and October, and 100% of those staff surveyed have advised that they would change their work practice following the training. In addition, they also said that the training gave them confidence to ask about domestic abuse more directly, and the confidence to then signpost their clients onto support. So as a result of this, we can see that kind of targeted awareness raising can be effective when the message is designed for the target audience. We know that young people access media differently to other age groups, so again, we've looked at ways that we can continue that, and we're working to keep that going with a group of young people, and where we're going to co-produce some social media with them to continue getting the message out there, and really get them involved in the process, because they're the ones that will know what other young people will be looking for. So while testing has had a positive outcome on our project, we can't really discount the effects of COVID and the pandemic and the multiple lockdowns that we've had on those experiencing domestic abuse, and the subsequent demand that we saw on our support services. For survivors of domestic abuse, COVID resulted in an increased risk of harm and initially made seeking help more difficult. The advice to stay at home had major implications for those adults and children already living with someone who is abusive or controlling. And stringent restrictions on movement shut off avenues for escape, help seeking and ways of coping for survivors. Restrictive measures were also likely to play into the hands of people who abuse through tactics of control, surveillance and coercion. So it's no surprise then that we saw spikes in the number of people seeking domestic abuse support when lockdown measures were reduced. So going into 2021-2022, we're already seeing an increase in those seeking support for the first 3 quarters. And to date, we've already got 1,985 people having seek support so far this year, and that number is likely to increase in this last quarter. So in terms of scale and spread and where we're going next, the project will now come to an end because the aim has been achieved, and the project end report is being prepared at the moment. However, we are going to continue rolling out training across our frontline services. We've got a session booked in next week with 30 staff members from across our mental health first aiders, social work and housing booked in, and we're also doing targeted training with our housing officers in the new year as well. And domestic abuse champions are going to focus and target other underrepresented groups, such as older people, to try and encourage more people to seek support as well. And it's clear from not just our project, but local research that many victims of domestic abuse don't recognise that what they're experiencing is abuse. So we are going to continue with our targeted awareness raising where it is needed and continued to raise that awareness. And happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Questions? Councillor Gregg.
Chair, yeah, it's really good to see the the very positive results, the good partnership work that's going on there. And I think that it's particularly helpful to read about young people, raising awareness amongst young people of the risks that their lives can be in, even at home. I think this project, the aims have now been achieved. So it's really a question of what happens next, because there's clearly some very good practices emerging. I think that it's helpful that when partners go into homes, they are looking to recognise risks and dangers. But you know, we've kind of come to an end. So what happens next with this area of work?
I'll just come back on that. So as part of the kind of continued action plan and implementation plan of the Violence Against Women Partnership, we're always going to be raising awareness of our support services, raising awareness of domestic abuse. So I suspect that even though this project will come to an end in the Lloyd refresh, there will be other projects around domestic abuse and in areas where we're maybe seeing gaps in either those seeking support, or maybe something around why people don't feel that they can report to the police or they don't want to report to the police, to maybe try and encourage people to do that. So there will be continued awareness raising, training, ongoing.
Okay, thank you. That's very good to hear, because we don't want to see complacency set in. I think that these have been quite ambitious targets. It's good that they've been met, but we've got to keep moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Luann, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Lucy, for the presentation. I suppose my questions are about the capacity of services to be able to respond to the additional referrals, and also, you know, people seeking support is the first step, but I'd be really interested to hear more about what happened next and how many people were helped to actually leave the situations where they were living in domestic violence situations, or yeah, just I suppose it's the so what for the people that were referred for support that I'm particularly interested in. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just in terms of your first part, so we obviously did see demand on services increase during COVID, and when lockdown measures were kind of reduced and waiting lists kind of increased, and yeah, services were at capacity. As a result of that, many services were able to kind of acquire additional funding through delivering Equally Safe Fund from the Scottish Government, which helped increase that capacity. And while we have still seen people on waiting lists, these have been much reduced to what they were kind of this time last year. It's always going to be an issue probably, because I think demand is always going to be outweigh the capacity of services at times. But we are working to kind of make that better and increase funding opportunities for our specialist services. In terms of the second part of your question, so many of our specialist services offer women like one-to-one group work sessions to really look at how they can move on from those relationships if they choose to do so. Some will choose to stay in that relationship, and it will be about how they keep themselves safe in that relationship. We can't force people to leave abusive relationships. But you've also got those who are potentially going through the court system, who are on the Caledonian programme, so perpetrators working on their own behaviour as well. There's definitely more that we could do around early intervention for perpetrators, and it's something that we are exploring. But at this time, it's focusing on therapeutic group work with women to help them kind of move past that. So if that's what they choose to do.
Do you want to come back on that, Luann?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor MacDonald, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was two things around the domestic abuse champions. I seem to hear, and you could maybe let me know, that most of them were Aberdeen City Council departments, and I just wondered if there had been an offer to other partners to perhaps take up that role, and then to ask around the substance misuse staff, whether that was mostly council led as well, because I think there is a bigger picture.
Yeah, it's something that we're looking to explore, and I know that there are other areas and partners who have kind of champions in place. The work that we've done with students at NESCOL, and we're continuing to do some work with Aberdeen University as well. I think there's definitely potential there for domestic abuse champions. And the substance misuse staff are NHS staff, so the ones that we're training there, we're kind of hoping will then become our domestic abuse champions in those areas, so that they can then get the word out and continue to raise awareness within their own teams and colleagues.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Lucy. And I guess this is just one part of the jigsaw of what goes on around domestic abuse. But one thing I did want to highlight, and maybe is because women are not being able to access solicitors. It's a huge issue. It's been picked, I've been speaking to Grampian Women's Aid about it recently, and that's partly why they don't even perhaps go initially to report things to the police, because they just know they're not going to get legal aid. And even if they do find a solicitor, and I know it was easier during COVID because things could be done virtually, but post-COVID, it's very difficult for women to get solicitors. And whilst I know that's not maybe part of this project, I think it is something that we just need to keep highlighting, and that maybe more of a spotlight needs to be shone on that aspect. Because if you're not going to get something at the end, why would you start the whole process of reporting and going through the courts when you just know that you're not going to be able to get that support? It's kind of a rhetorical question, I think.
I'll just come back briefly because, yeah, I absolutely agree. We're seeing women now who have been waiting 2-3 years to get to court for the offences. Many who have actually kind of moved on from the relationship, and it's just rehashing trauma and difficult situations for them. I think even pre-COVID, that was still an issue. In terms of timescales for getting to court. So yeah, it's absolutely something that the Violence Against Women Partnership is looking at and trying to kind of address.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any more hands in the room, and I'm not seeing any hands on the screen. So, Lucy, if I can pass my thanks to you for coming along. I think you've generated a lot of interesting questions, and your presentation was absolutely excellent. It was really, really interesting, and I think some of the statistics should be giving us all quite a lot of pause for thought. So thank you very much indeed for that. Moving on then, I'll move to Appendix 3 in 3.1, which is making Aberdeen a living wage city action plan. And we have Martin Barry from Scottish Enterprise to take us through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, Martin Barry from the police team within Scottish Enterprise. I'm also the Scottish Enterprise rep on the Aberdeen Prospers Outcome Improvement Group, and have been lead for the Real Living Wage Improvement Charter. It's good to be here this afternoon, especially after reaching such a major milestone with this project. I think it was back in February I updated the board last in terms of where we were with the project and the ambition within the LOIP for this Aberdeen to become a real living wage city. I think at that meeting I mentioned the focus for this year would be the drafting of an action plan which would form the basis of our application to join the Making Living Wage
Places scheme. And the project group have worked really hard throughout the year to develop this plan to get it to the stage where we actually made the announcement of our joining the Living Wage Places scheme at the Responsible Business event a couple of weeks ago, and we got really good press and publicity as a result of that. So we're now at the stage of we're about to submit the 3-year action plan to the Living Wage Foundation for formal approval, but I thought it was important to bring it before the Community Planning Board for endorsement before we do so. I mean, I'm not going to go through this plan page by page, but maybe just give you a quick overview. It's been a good year for the real living wage in the city. We saw 19 new accreditations since the start of the year, including some major employers, NHS Grampian, the Chamber of Commerce, the Port of Aberdeen, Aberdeen Performing Arts. And that means that we've now doubled the amount of accredited real living wage employers in Aberdeen since the start of the project. We're now at 75 headquartered in Aberdeen. And this plan sets out to at least double that amount over the coming years. We do have other targets. We're looking at the amount of people that are actually uplifted to real living wage rates in the city, and expanding the coverage of employees in the city. I should point out that the figures in this plan are still draft. The Living Wage Foundation are still kind of providing some analysis and sense checking. The figures in the plan, I would suggest that the accreditation target will increase. The uplift target will probably be around about 900, and the coverage number will probably come down quite a bit, because obviously with NHS Grampian accrediting this year, that kind of skewed the figures. So we're not going to have any more employers really of the size of NHS Grampian accrediting. So we will look to increase the numbers certainly going forward. The action group is in the process of being established. It will be the basis of the project group that's worked so far. Plus, we've taken Councillor Allard, who in his role as the new convener of the Poverty and Anti-Poverty and Inequalities Committee. He spoke at the event a couple of weeks ago, and I'm really grateful to the City Council for giving us, Councillor Allard. It really is a great boost to the project. But we'll also have officer representation from the council, myself, Scottish Enterprise, NHS Grampian, Living Wage Scotland, ACFO. We'll also have employer representation as well. Station House media units have come on board. We've also in conversations with a couple of accredited employers about joining the group as well. And that's really important to supplement the experience of employers, because they're the ones that can go out and really sell the scheme to other employers. This is a milestone, obviously, but there's still a lot of hard work to do. I think the real living wage has never been needed more than it is at the moment. But we do also have to realise that people are struggling, but employers are struggling as well, and we have to kind of obviously be aware of the conversations we're having going forward with this project. So lots of work to do, but really good to get to this stage, and just happy to take questions, and grateful for the chance to take this here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. If I can maybe come in first and ask you, a lot of really good news in here in what is very, very, very challenging financial circumstances, and that applies right across the country. But I obviously would temper that with, are there any particular areas in our local economy that we are seeing problems progressing this? And do you think there is anything we need to be thinking about to what we can do to help those perhaps groups to actually deliver on this? Because I don't think people are going to see anything like as hard a time as we are currently in, and certainly in my lifetime. But I think that might apply to quite a few folk in the room. So I wouldn't mind if you could just pass some commentary in around that, please.
Yeah, I mean, that absolutely. I mean, there'll be conversations with various employers and sectors, you know, over the coming years, and we're going to have to temper our conversations accordingly. So we are engaging with, you know, the Chamber of Commerce, the Federation of Small Businesses, to get those temperature checks and really understand the low pay sectors within the city. I mean, I think some of the sectors will be fairly clear. Hospitality is clearly going to be one, care. So, you know, we will go in and speak with these sectors. We will understand the pressures they're under, and, you know, some may willingly be happy to sign up, but if they can't at the moment, you know, one employer I spoke to a wee while back said, well, I would happily sign up, but it would mean I would have to pay 2 people off to pay the real living wage. Well, obviously we can't do that. But, you know, sometimes with the Living Wage Foundation, they will quite happily work with employers, and some employers have been working with for several years, but they're on that journey to become a real living wage employer. But obviously it has to be sustainable for them, because as I said, you know, the ultimate ambition of this project is to get more money into people's pockets, but we have to be aware that employers are facing a tough time as well.
Thank you very much for that. So if I can open it to the rest of the board, questions for Mr. Barry, please. I'm not seeing it. Oh, Councillor Craig.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is a really welcome report. This is a theme that is very important for the city to work on. So many thanks for progressing this. Yeah, I mean, the aim is to share prosperity, recognizing that there are severe economic pressures just now. So the incentives, the ability to do that and to adopt the real living wage policy will be challenging. So is there a chance for increasing the number of accredited living wage employers? Is that something that one would set targets for, or forecast in some way? Is there any way of estimating or what we can do to influence that so that the number grows?
Yeah, I think it's around about just having that employer voice. You know, to be honest, I said that's why we're looking to ensure that we have real living wage accredited employers on the action group, because they are the ones who have been through that process and that journey. So they understand the issues that are facing businesses. You know, if I, as an officer, go out, I don't run a business, I don't understand the pressures they're under, but, you know, we have 2 or 3 individuals who, one in particular who has established and set up his own business, has become an accredited employer. So he is understanding the pressures that his employees are facing, his business is facing in the current conditions. And, you know, that I think gives it the credibility. I guess, you know, when I first took on this project, I started running it just a couple of months before the lockdown period started. And then we actually had to suspend it because obviously at that point in time, businesses faced other pressures, and, you know, survival was the key thing. And at that point, I was really concerned about the future of this movement. And we thought we would lose some businesses because they would say, well, we just can't afford accreditation. We can't afford these rates. But actually, accreditation rates increased across the country, which for me was really great to see, because I think it showed that employers really were starting to value their employees. And I think, you know, there are benefits to becoming an accredited employer. You know, there's improved retention rates, there's savings that can be made in terms of training, for example. So, you know, as I said, there will be different conversations for different employers. In some cases, it will be about making a bit more of a business case to show, you know, the benefits to employers in signing up.
Thanks for that. I think it's really comforting that there are a large number of employers who have that sense of social responsibility and who very much care about their employees. So that does, I think that should give us a sense of reassurance, and many thanks again. Thank you.
Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you very much. And just looking on page 111 about the core targets, and it's difficult to know, isn't it? If you're looking for 20 employers, you just need one that has 2,500 employees, and you've hit one target, but maybe not the other ones. So it'll be interesting from a data perspective to see where we are in November 2023 and get some more information around that, because you know, the targets are useful to have there, but it's the story underneath them that really shines a light on things.
Yes, absolutely, Councillor. As I said, you know, you could hit one, you know, employer and that hits the rest of your targets, but, you know, I think it's very important we have the uplifts and the coverage as well. I mean, I think the key thing to remember is, you know, we have got most of the big employers within the city now accredited, the council, NHS Grampian, university, you know, so the remainder of the business base is pretty, you know, and I think 86% are employ less than 10 people and 96 less than 50. So it probably will be a bit of a trickle, to be honest with you. But yeah, that's, you know, the business base we're working with. And of course, these targets will be reviewed by the action group, and, you know, hopefully we will, you know, reach them and beat them by a good while. And, you know, obviously in future years we can look to increase, but these have kind of been, the approved figures will be kind of based on previous years' experience.
Yeah, and how? What about things like Police Scotland, which are national bodies, but, you know, don't have, you know, is not particularly got well, we'll have an Aberdeen angle, but it will be ever changing. How do we account for those?
Yes, so it's not an exact science in terms of the coverage, because we will get credit for the accredited employers who are headquartered in the city. But obviously, yeah, as you say, there are organisation employers around the country who will be headquartered, yeah, police, fire service. You know, if you take some, you know, off the top of my head, Nationwide Building Society, BP is another one, you know. So, you know, what we will look at also are the annual household, the ONS from the ONS, the survey of household earnings, and that gives us a kind of broad coverage. So I think it's 93.3% of employee jobs in the city at the moment currently are paid real living wage rate or higher. You know, that's still 10,000 jobs in the city. So we have looked to see if we can get that kind of figure about branches, but you'll never get, you know, from the Nationwide Building Society, the amount of, you know, employees in one branch, or, you know, the hundreds of branches they may have around the country. So it's not an exact science.
And just lastly, I just wonder if things like Deliveroo, you know, actually get counted in that either, because they are national, or even things like taxi firms, which, you know, it's difficult sometimes to know the ratio of hours to income and so on. It's difficult, but yeah. No, good report.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, obviously the focus will be on employers who are headquartered in the city, although, you know, the ambition for this is to obviously make this a kind of regional project in due course. So we're not going to kind of, you know, be totally restricted in terms of employers in Inverurie or West Hill or Huntly or wherever. But, you know, our focus will be on local employers headquartered, but we are working closely with employers who are headquartered elsewhere, but have a substantial presence in the city, because the likes of BP, you know, if they speak in support of the project, then it's a voice that, you know, gets heard. So we, you know, we really want to build organisations like that into our communications plan.
Thank you very much for that. I don't have any more hands, and I'm not seeing anything on the board. So thank you very much indeed for coming along, Mr. Barry. I think that was really interesting. And I'll then move on to Appendix 4, which was Aberdeen Climate and Nature Pledge, and we have Sinclair Lang.
Thank you, Chair. I'll speak to the pledge in a moment, if I may. I just wanted to take a couple of minutes just to give it a bit of context, and it's in the wider work that's going on. And apologies to a couple of people on the floor who will have already heard some of this in this chamber in the last week. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Sinclair Lang, and I've been recently appointed as the Council's new Climate and Environment Policy Service Manager. So as we're facing certain societal challenges much more these days, political consciousness, social consciousness is changing. The Council is restructured and strengthened in readiness to face some of these challenges. And it'll be no surprise to you to hear that two of these challenges are climate change and nature loss. Very real crises of today, not just tomorrow. So they profoundly affect every part of our lives, our economies, and our societies now and into the future, and often in very complex and interconnected ways. They also show very strong correlations with inequalities and social justice issues, which of course are very pertinent today, and all of which are priorities for this partnership. Challenges are, of course, also opportunities. So for an example, the global energy city that we are, if we can help shape that from the traditional oil and gas sector into a renewable sector facing a just energy transition, we can help to tackle global climate change, and if approached right, also secure future economic prosperity, reduce inequalities, and improve our local environments. These are everyone's challenges and opportunities, and lots of people and organisations are already working on them. And that's critical given the scale and pace of change that's really needed to address them. It's the role of literally everyone to act at some level on these issues from bottom to top and across every activity. That's in part why I sit on the Community Plan Partnership Sustainable City Group to embed this work collectively on these interconnected issues, and specifically with regards to place stretch outcomes 13, 14 and 15 and their associated improvement projects, and specifically 15.3, which is the Nature Pledge. Perfect, thank you for changing slides. That's also why the Council has led on the development of Net Zero Aberdeen. It's a collective citywide route map setting out a pathway to Aberdeen reaching net zero climate emissions. And to clarify, this is not a council-only project. The Council is leading on it, but it's very much a partnership approach across the city. So the documents have been developed by Net Zero Leadership Board and the Delivery Unit, which is representatives from right across industry and community in Aberdeen. The route map is supported by 6 place-based strategies on key themes, and they are mobility, buildings and heat, circular economy, energy supply, the natural environment, and empowerment, which we've already heard some about today. Each of the strategies was developed by a different partner organisation, supported by a council expert in inverted commas. Next slide, please. The route map and key theme documents are all available online on a section of the Council's website called Net Zero Aberdeen. I have some of them here today, and I'm going to leave some pledge cards on the table behind me if anyone wants to pick them up on the way out, and those have links to that place on the website. Now, all of those strategies are important, especially the empowerment one, as this is really a citywide route map that belongs to everyone, and a significant part of the first 5 strategies can only really be delivered with everyone acting together in their decisions. Aberdeen Adapts is a sister framework for Net Zero Aberdeen, and it's looking at adapting to the climate that's changing today and tomorrow, not just reducing emissions. So it incorporates the views of local organisations and communities and sets the direction to build long-term climate resilience for the city. And the framework's also available at the same location. So the Aberdeen Climate and Nature Pledge, which I'm really here to highlight today, was launched on the 16th of November at the Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group's conference at TECA. And it brings together and seeks to deliver on aspects of all the stretch outcomes I've mentioned, and specifically that 15.3 improvement project, as well as wider issues. It's open to businesses, organisations, members of the public to pledge their support towards our citywide goals of reducing emissions, adapting to the effects of climate change, and restoring nature across our city. We're aiming for 23 organisations to be signed up by 2023. And some additional reasons for them to do that is it provides a platform for public commitments by those organisations and a degree of scrutiny from the public that's increasingly being sought of those organisations. It also creates a network for the sharing of information and collective working on specific issues and projects, including managing land for nature, installing retrofit in buildings, etc. So we have a sitting audience that we can tap into to try and deliver those challenges. A number of organisations have already signed up, including the City Council via the Lord Provost, Aberdeen Renewable Energy Group, the North East Scotland Climate Action Network, and more. And I'm really here just to highlight this today and encourage every single individual in the room and the organisations they represent to sign up towards reaching our citywide goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Questions? Councillor MacDonald.
Just, can you give me a flavour of the 23 by 23, please? Who those 23 might be?
We do have a list. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head who they are now, but we have identified a range of organisations that we will target specifically. They generally are ones who have good land assets that we can tap into. So I'll give you one example: Sport Aberdeen, the NHS, and so on. So, but as I said, anyone is free to sign up, so we may well end up with more. But we will be for the nature bit in particular, we will be targeting landowners.
Thank you very much for that. I'm not seeing any other hands in the room, and I'm not seeing any other hands on the board. So thank you very much indeed for that, Sinclair. That was most helpful. This takes us to the end of 3.1. Now, the recommendations are on page 74. There are 7 recommendations. I won't read them all out, but can we agree the recommendations? I'm seeing nodding heads. Thank you very much indeed. And that takes us to item 3.2, project end 1.6, an increase in the uptake of unclaimed benefits by 10% across Aberdeen City by 2023. And do we have Angela in the, oh, there we are, Angela. Sorry, I didn't see you there.
Thank you. Angela Kazmierzak, Financial Inclusion Team Leader, and I'm back again to do my end report. Hopefully you still remember the case study that I did last time. So it's just to say, here to present my end report. The outcomes have continued to be sustained and are showing that we're 71% over our original aim statement, and that 88% of people that are using the online benefit calculator, we're identifying new benefits. So it's really positive to still see that coming through on the data. We continue to do a monthly benefit spotlight that we're sharing. So each month we're looking at a different benefit, and we'll be sharing that through the communities and our partners. We've got the support for Families Booklet all finished, and I'm happy to announce we actually got some funding to get it printed rather than emailing it out. So I'm just waiting on some pricing to see how many copies we can get printed out, because ideally I would like to do a bag drop. Glasgow City Council, when they did a bit of initiative with their schools, they did a bag drop and it showed a really improvement in parents claiming benefits. So we want to try that one out as well. The QR code for the benefit calculator is now embedded in all our rent arrears letters that goes out to encourage any tenant that may have found themselves in financial difficulties to check if they may be entitled to help. So, you know, with this project, you know, we've proved that the tested changes work, and it's business as usual, embedding this and just carrying on, maximising people's benefit where we can.
Thank you very much for that, Angela. And can I say I was actually in a pre-meet with Graham because he's just joining the board, and I was singing praises of your presentation at the last board meeting because I actually thought it just blew me away, some of the work you guys had done. Anybody got any questions on this paper? I totally agree, Councillor MacDonald, totally agree. Jonathan, thanks.
Brilliant, thank you, and thank you, Angela. I was just wondering at the end on page 128, when it goes into the opportunities and risks of scaling up to other benefits, if there'd been any thought so far as to what those other benefits might be, or if that's still a bit of exploration still to take place.
One of the I was just actually at an event, I think it's called Can and Network event here a couple of weeks ago, and it was really interesting meeting some of the community projects. And one of the things that we did identify is we need to get back out in the communities. We need to start doing in-person events. So going out there, because they're dealing with people day in and day out. And whilst the workers have some awareness. They don't have the kind of detailed kind of experience and knowledge that's required. So we're about to kind of look at where can we go and get that arranged, because I think we're already arranging to go to Inchgarth Food Bank. We have already arranged to go to, what's it called? Aberdeen Street Friends, I think it's a Monday and a Thursday. Yep, so we go there once a month. So we're looking to get back out in the community because that's going to reach people that may not be online, that might not be able to use the online benefit calculator. So that's the plan that we're going to start implementing and get out there.
Thank you, and thank you very much for that. And I'm sure we'll hear some more about the stuff you're doing further down the line. I'm not seeing any other hands, so in that case, there are 4 recommendations on page 1 to 8. Can we agree the recommendations? Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for that, Angela. That takes us to 3.3, again a project end. 15.2, increase community food growing in schools, communities and workplaces by 2023. And I see we have Mr. Shaw with us to give us some background. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Shaw. I'm Aberdeen City Council's Environmental Manager. The purpose of the report is to present the results of the LIPE Improvement Project Aim 15.2, increase community food growing in schools, communities and workplaces by 12, and seeks approval to end the project as the aim has been achieved. We've had great fun with this one, and we've far achieved our original target. We've had in 2022 45 new groups food growing across the city, and it's been absolutely brilliant, to be honest. And word is growing, so I'm confident we'll have the same again next year, and we'll keep going with this. We've had all manner of groups doing food growing projects in our local area, from childminders, 2-3-year-olds helping us growing food projects now, right through to sheltered housing complexes where we have ladies in their 90s determined to grow at their doorstep. So it's been absolutely fantastic to be involved in that, and it's been an inspiration, to be honest, to see these people going about their business and doing, just asking simple questions. The support is very easy. We just give people a pack of seeds and away they go, and it's incredible what they're achieving. Word is spreading. So initially at the beginning of the year, we were working with 1 or 2 nurseries and primary schools. They're obviously all speaking to each other. So I'm getting lots of emails and telephone calls now asking if we can give the same support and stuff, if you like, to these other groups. And of course we can. We're there to help and support and encourage where we can. We can't do it for them, but we can certainly be there to help and encourage them. The project has been assisted by the nature restoration funding from Scottish Government, which has allowed us to buy bits and pieces, which we then share with a lot of these groups. And that's worked very well, because it just gives these groups are just starting off that bit of something to get going with, and it's just been terrific fun. It's the best way to spend an afternoon when you're going to visit these groups and learning about what they're doing. And it's not just about the food growing. These groups now become keen to get involved in further initiatives that the council and others are working on. For example, many of the groups now do litter picks. They want to get involved in tree planting. They want to do all sorts of good things. But I think the key to what's good about the groups is they become a very powerful voice of support for the council in terms of what we're doing. We're doing this as a sort of green family rather than we're just giving you a bit of stuff to get crack on. It's very much we're thought of as a partner, and what we're doing across the city in terms of a food growing initiative, they feel very much part of that. And of course, just 2 weeks ago, Aberdeen was crowned the best in Scotland in terms of from Keep Scotland Beautiful and Beautiful Scotland Awards. And what these groups are doing ties into that, it links to that. Without these groups, we wouldn't be achieving those big awards. And the look on some of these faces when I'm handing out certificates and things, it's just fantastic because they feel very much part of it, and are really keen to keep involved. And it's just lovely, to be honest. You all need to get out there and say hello to some of these groups. We're coming back to the townhouse in a couple of weeks, so come over and say hello. We're going to do a wee celebrated event with as many of our groups as we can. It's been fantastic. It hasn't stopped because we've reached the target. We will just continue. The plan very much is this is business as usual. It was before. We've now pushed it a little bit, and we'll continue to push that and make it very much about what we do. It's just across the city, whether it's a, we've got 24 childminders now who are growing food at home. And that's just, I think it's not even 20% of the total number of childminders in the city. So it's recognised that initiative has really spurred on some of the childminders and their kids. So they're really keen to grow it further. So we're working very closely with that childminding group about all sorts of environmental type initiatives to get them working with us. And they're lovely. And they're so, we had kids out last week, 2 3-year-olds clearing leaves in the park. And as you know, the amount of moans and groans I get about leaves, to see 2 and 3-year-olds just getting stuck in brought a right smile to my face. It was lovely to see that. So yeah, it's going great. I've been chuffed to bits with how it's gone, and how successful and how quickly we got to the target we'd set. But it's just, as I say, it's business as usual, and we'll keep going, and we will keep going. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I could perhaps say on behalf of the board, I know how much work your team does, and really would ask that you pass on our thanks to your team, because they really do make a big impression across the city, and it's in every ward of the city and every community of the city, I think, is reached by your team. And they really do make a difference, and we actually do see it when we go out into our communities. I can honestly say that the city is extremely well thought of when it comes to all the work that you and your team actually do.
Thank you.
And probably the biggest cost is going to be buying more shelving for holding all the awards that you seem to manage to successfully win, and they're well deserved at that. So with that, I'll ask if anyone has any questions for Mr. Shaw. I've got Councillor Radley and then Councillor Gregg.
Mine's more of a comment than a question. Having been out with the community groups at for the Keep Scotland Beautiful awards, I can honestly say how much passion and community feeling there are from these groups, and the support and levels of facilitation given by Stephen and his team are just, fantastic. All they need is a wee bit of encouragement, a wee bit of soil, and they're good to go. And you can see that their ongoing commitment to the project is really clear. And even if Stephen and his team take a back step and let them flourish, they're going to continue it for years to come. So I can't thank Stephen and his team enough for the work that they put into community groups and community food growing, because it really has made a difference within our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Also very sincere, warm thanks for the tremendous achievements that have resulted from this very concerted programme of work. We spoke earlier about community empowerment, particularly in relation to the strategy, and it seems to me that we have just heard a really good example of community empowerment where residents have been mobilised, supported, bringing huge social, health, cultural benefits, you name it. So I think that that's something to celebrate, but also falls under the heading of community empowerment. And maybe they are slightly isolated from each other too much, but the work is getting done, and I think that that's marvellous. Thank you.
I've got Michelle, and then I've got Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholl. I'll just come in briefly. And just picking up your point, Councillor Gregg, absolutely, that's the kind of collaboration we're trying to increase for the community environment strategy across all our light projects. But I just thought I'd highlight that, Councillor Nicholl, we've spoken about going into next year, maybe having a programme of visits that the board could participate in to see some of the good work going on across all our light projects and the community. So just really wanted to pick up on your point there, Stephen, about us going out and seeing it, and if we can connect, maybe just to plan that out as a board visit for next year.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Councillor MacDonald, and then Mr. O'Connor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to add to the plaudits, Mr. Shaw, about the work your group's doing and what other groups, whether it's CFINE or the WA Reach Out Project and many others who are doing fantastic work across the city. I think there's a real prize there as well in intergenerational work with older and younger coming together and doing these things together. And I think that's something that you can't sometimes put a finger on, but when you see it in action, it really does work. Yeah, it's not an end, I don't think. And looking forward to the chutney, the jam, the whatever else comes out of the food growing, the potatoes that the world. The Children's World UNESCO event we went to see earlier in the month, and they had some really good stories to tell about their potatoes too. So it was good.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, Stephen, for many, many years, we've benefited as a community from your support, and the reputation of yourself and your team is well known for being a can-do kind of attitude and being helpful. So I would really thank you for all that. I've got green stuff in my community garden I didn't even know existed. It's fantastic, but it's not just the food, it's the amount of people. It's then the community garden side with all the plants, the trees. I've got 120 apple trees planted by volunteers who got enthused with getting the initial support and soil for yourselves. So I suppose just the other wee question there, I was trying to find it in the report, and sorry if I've missed it. Are you still working with the likes of One Seed Forward? And as we're moving forward, just kind of keep the communities in mind. We'd love more support from you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Absolutely. One Seed Forward, CFINE. Anybody who will speak to us and work with us, we will work with. We never turn anyone away. If we can help in any way we can. You know, it's not all about finances all the time. It's just about being there and being able to support and just giving a wee bit of a steer in terms of what might work and what doesn't work. And most of these organisations are now good friends of ours, and we got on very, very well, and we're there for each other, which is great. We don't see it as a, you know, it's a partnership, so it's working together to get that outcome, and it's growing and growing all the time. We've created a monster, to be perfectly honest, but it's a brilliant monster, yeah. And long may that continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'm not seeing any more hands, so with that, I'll turn to the report at page 134. There are 2 recommendations. Can we agree the recommendations? Thank you very much, and thank you very much again, Mr. Shaw. Thank you very much for that. That takes us to item 3.4, a child-friendly city update, and we've got Matt Reid online. Matt?
Afternoon, Chair, and thank you for that. Really just for me, I just wanted to provide just a couple of points from within the report that I provided you with, which really just kind of highlights some of our continued progress against the UNICEF Child Friendly Cities programme. Pleased to sort of say that there are a number of areas within our action plan which is provided alongside the report that we are really making some fairly significant progress against. We have got a meeting tomorrow, which is a 6-monthly progress review meeting with UNICEF to discuss progress to date. So we've been doing quite a bit of work in the background just to ensure that we've got undertaken some evaluation. We've got some fairly robust evidence to back up and verify that we're making the progress that we're suggesting we are making. And I'm pleased to say that we have managed to gather that in time. Really good progress being made, particularly against some of the areas within the programme and our action plan, with particular regards, I would say, within participation. We've seen a lot of really good practice now emerging from the Youth Participation Network that has been formed and now routinely meets, and they've come together to develop a range of pieces of work, looking particularly at providing some guidance and developing a toolkit for professionals to work with children and young people that's been developed in collaboration with children and young people as part of our efforts to ensure that children and young people's views are listened to and actually acknowledged and make a difference within their city. lots of really good work that they're working on in terms of also making sure that the plan that we're working against is accessible and can be understood by children and young people. You will see in terms of the accompanying documents I provided you with that the template that we've been given by UNICEF is not necessarily particularly accessible, and the language complex. So a small group of children and young people are working alongside us and colleagues in our design team to really pull out what they feel are the key messages, the things that children and young people need to know, and also to increase the accountability that we have to the children and young people that we have living in the city. So there's lots of work coming through, particularly with regards participation and the badge there, and lots of really good work from the Youth Network. Also, I think I would highlight some of the successes that are being delivered by strategic place planning colleagues with increasingly creative approaches to engagement of children and young people, really looking at engaging and consulting with them about developments across their city. I think we had a reference just slightly earlier to some of the children and young people who talked at the World Children's Day event that took place in the last week or two, I think it was, who talked around some of the work that they were doing around within their community. But we also heard from a range of groups that are supported by colleagues with strategic place planning and other colleagues through the creative learning team around city centre master plan development work, and how they listen to and the views of children and young people and take them into consideration. Lots of really good work kind of happening from there. Within the kind of council perspective as well, we're increasingly seeing more detailed use of our integrated impact assessments, where we're demonstrating that consideration of children and young people in terms of the approaches we're taking, the policies, the plans, the strategies that we're bringing before committees. And it's really encouraging to see that children and young people are being consulted with, but also there's real consideration of the impact our decisions are going to have on the lives of children and young people, and the steps that we need to undertake if those impacts are going to be in any way sort of negative. So I think we're increasingly seeing that consideration of children and young people at a range of different decision-making levels, which is really encouraging. As I said, we've got a 6-monthly progress review meeting with UNICEF tomorrow, which we really hope will validate what we've said here and the progress that we're making, as well as give us a little bit of a steer in terms of some of the other areas that we may continue to work on, and give us some increased support where perhaps there are some gaps or areas that we feel need to be developed further. And with a view to that, we have developed collaboratively with partners, we've developed an action plan tracker, so we can really take a clearer a more considered approach in terms of what activities we're planning, and able to measure what progress we've made. And in future reports, I would like to share that with the board as well, so that you can make clearer links to the activity and developments that we're undertaking, and how those link specifically to the points within the action plan that I've attached and provided. And then I've got a couple of just recommendations around kind of the future support we'd really be hoping we could seek from yourselves. And that's really it from me.
Thank you very much for that, and I would very much endorse what you said about some of the communications can be quite tortuous to untangle, and why that is, I don't really know, but perhaps it's simply the nature of the beast. Questions? Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Mr. Reid, I think mentioned the World Children's Day event at Nescall, which I think was the 16th of November. Yeah, I was there, Councillor MacDonald was there, and it was wonderful to see young teams of young people at different ages, different age groups, working together, articulating their views, really demonstrating what human rights for children means, which is being creative, producing things and getting together. It was a lovely example of what can be done. The UNCRC is very high level. It's an extremely general theme, but there's mention in the report on page 139 that there's a self-evaluation tool for schools to action the UNCRC within their individual school communities, and I think it might be useful if we just get a very broad understanding of is that being implemented? Is it in all schools, just rights respecting schools. That would be useful to know that the rights culture is, expanding.
Yeah, certainly. So I think there's a number of different approaches we take in our schools. Absolutely, the Right to Respected Schools programme is something which is widely supported across a fairly significant proportion of the schools in Aberdeen. What I would say with that is it's not the only way to ensure that our schools are actually really recognising, realising and upholding the rights of children and young people. And there's lots of different approaches that schools take. What I would say in terms of that self-evaluation tool is it's a tool that's been developed with practitioners, so teachers and promoted staff as well in other schools. And what that serves to do is really look at different aspects of the UNCRC and they're really linked closely to the health to Shinari. So they're linking the children's rights to the wellbeing indicators because it's a language that's commonly understood by children and young people. The self-evaluation, the tool is actually developed so that it is posing questions related to these things, both to staff and to children and young people. And it's essentially around that triangulation of data as well, making sure that what we think we're doing in our schools is actually backed up and supported by the experiences that children and young people are telling us that they're having. As far as I understand with that, at the moment it's being tested. So I think there's the plan would certainly be to make it a resource that's rolled out and is accessible for all schools to utilise and use. But I think at the moment it's fairly small scale in terms of the number of schools that are perhaps actually actively utilising it.
Thank you for that. So are we able to use some method, maybe some other methodology for getting reassurance that the UNCRC principles are being followed up in each of the schools? Is that something that can be analysed, identified, so that we've got the comfort that it's happening everywhere, or so that we can measure how far we still have to go?
Certainly. So I mean, I think it's a conversation and something that I would pick up with other colleagues within education. Certainly in terms of the quality improvement visits, for example, and the framework of visits that takes place, there would certainly be observation taking place around the robustness of policies. Is it embedded in terms of some of the policies that we use around kind of relationships policies in schools, anti-bullying policies? Most schools will be making use of it. In fact, I would say it's probably all schools, but I need to double check that with education colleagues. We'll be using the Respect Me guidance, which places children's rights at the very centre of that policy. In terms of the aspects to do with children and young people having opportunities to have their voices heard and listened to and support improvements, we see evidence of that in terms of the school improvement planning processes and the range of opportunities that are provided, both in terms of directing learning and opportunities to shape their learning experiences, and also in terms of the pupil groups and influencing whole school change. So there's lots of things that we are seeing in terms of how we could potentially take a considered evaluative approach. I would definitely something I would be happy to have a further conversation with in terms of that with education colleagues. I would think that it would be fairly robustly covered in terms of the approaches we're taking, but certainly it's something I'm happy to have that conversation and be able to feedback regarding, if that would be helpful.
Thank you for that. Any further questions? I'm not seeing any hands, so thank you very much for that, Matt. That was most helpful. And with that, there are 3 recommendations at page 141 of the report. Can we agree the recommendations? Thank you very much. That takes us to item 4.1, the Scottish Government Inquiry into Community Planning. I have Michelle Coughlin, but that's the wrong name because it's Michelle McCombie. Michelle.
Thank you, Councillor Nicoll. I'll just briefly explain. The paper sets out the Scottish Government Inquiry of Community Planning, call for views. So what I would say is it's not the first time we've been asked to give views on how the CPP has worked during the pandemic, and all 32 CPPs have. So we do have information and material that we can draw upon. So my proposal is that I can draft a response on behalf of Community Plan in Aberdeen, and Community Plan in Aberdeen partners will be invited to add to that review. Certainly if partners are forthcoming with the information under the questions that are being asked as part of the inquiry, happy to receive that and feed it in. But otherwise, I'll draft something, consult with partners, and then, because we don't have another CPA board meeting before the deadline, would seek approval from the Chair and Vice Chair to submit that.
Thank you very much for that. I think that's eminently sensible. Do we have any questions or queries or comments? Councillor MacDonald.
It was just to, would you welcome just a quick phone call just to feed in any comments that I might have? Thanks.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I think that would apply to all members of the board. If they have any comments, if we could perhaps just go direct back to Michelle, that would perhaps be very helpful. Okay, with that in mind, the recommendations are on page 166. There are 3. Can we agree the recommendations? Thank you very much indeed. That takes us to our last paper, 4.2, Aberdeen City Local Police Plan 2023 to 26 consultation. And we have our new Vice Chair, Graham Mackey, with us to answer any questions. Graham.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Obviously, day 3 in the job, so I can't claim this to be my work, but grateful for my predecessor, Kate Stephen, for preparing this draft, which I'm reassured has been sent out for consultation just now, and we've tried to reach as far and wide as possible. And that consultation is ongoing just now, and will continue into late December. But as I say, that's the process we're in just now, and if there's any observations or comments as part of that consultation, be delighted to take them.
Thank you very much. And have we got any questions on the draft? Oh, sorry, Jonathan, thanks.
I was just going to raise a reflection. I'm sure it'll be in there in the thinking anyway. Let me see. I think page 177 of the pack, and it had the local priorities, how they match up along to strategic outcomes. And I think against the antisocial behaviour, violence and disorder, it mentions the effectiveness. Again, like earlier, I think Aberdeen has often been at the forefront of engagement with communities, of policing by consent, not just with intelligence and information, but the confidence people have to engage with the police. I'd suggest certainly for most of what's listed there under the local policing priorities, that good community engagement can help to reach the outcomes for all of them, even on topics that may at times feel beyond what there might be a community awareness of, thinking of serious organised crime or protecting vulnerable people. I think, in fact, there will often be a knowledge in communities where these groups might be based, or where those vulnerable people are, thinking of a number of examples that I could list locally, and making sure there is that confidence in being able to have the conversation confidentially. Let's say that while there may not be that same feedback loop, some of that intelligence gathering might be confidential, still that confidence that the conversation is happening, that the police are able to take action, I think has been a model that's been really successful. I think at times with that reduced resource, it's been missed when it's not been as active as we both would like it to be. But certainly the appetite's still there, very much within communities, and we see it all the way from local community council meetings through to the forum in a citywide context, sometimes even with the national policing plans, a lot of the responses focusing on those kinds of issues. So just that reassurance again that while antisocial behaviour might be the most obvious item on which to link with communities, definitely an appetite and a willingness to engage in all of those and to keep that partnership in place with policing in Aberdeen.
Well, thank you for the comments, and I would echo everything you say there. And from a previous experience of working in Grampian Police and in North East Division previously as a local area commander, I can absolutely echo your points in terms of the partnership work and working with the community, working with consent of the citizens, and I'm absolutely certain that'll continue. And as I say, grateful for your comments and observations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other hands or anything on the screen, so if we could perhaps just note the contents of the consultation, and with that I'll close the meeting and note that the date of our next meeting will be the 15th of February next year. So I hope everybody has a enjoyable and safe time over the festive period. Thank you very much.